Thank you. Hey. Today's agenda includes discussion around waste stream audits and data collection. We will start with a consultant overview by GT Environmental. Then we will have a municipality and business services perspective from Rumpke, a manufacturing perspective from Aaron Hiley at Intertech, and lastly, some information from a university with Jessica Davis presenting to us. After they have presented their information, we will then move on to a panel discussion where we will be able to ask our questions at that time. If during their presentations you want to enter a question into the chat box, we will then get to them during that panel discussion and question overview time. After that has been completed, we are going to spend a few minutes during a breakout session where you'll go into individual rooms so that we can discuss goals, outcomes, future topics for additional recycling roundtable discussions. After the breakout sessions, we will reconvene and provide some conclusions and closing remarks. So when we think about waste audits, we want to think about some reasons that we may be performing them. Some people it's to save money. For others, it's to increase recycling rates and diversion numbers, or to reduce our carbon footprints, as well as to meet zero waste goals. All these are really great objectives, and there may be some that I'm not listing, but we're gonna hear from some presenters, and I'm really excited to introduce our first ones from GT Environmental, Ben Dawson and Lizzie, and I apologize if I mess up your last name, Van Dusen, or Doyson, maybe. Okay. And you guys should be able, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you guys can share your screen and begin your presentation. All right. Can you hear me? All right, everyone.
Lizzie, you're a little bit quiet.
How about now? Good?
Much better.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Lizzie Van Dusen. I'm joined by two of my other colleagues, Ben Dawson and Karen Lucan, who you'll hear about in just a little bit. But to start off, just a little introduction. I graduated from Ohio State with a sustainability degree, and I now work for GT Environmental as an environmental planner. So I've had the opportunity to work on a wide variety of projects, from writing solid waste plans for solid waste districts, to implementing education and outreach campaigns, and conducting waste and recycling audits, which we'll be talking about today. So with that, I'll let Ben introduce himself a little bit.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Dawson. I also graduated from Ohio State, actually with the same degree as Lizzie, a degree in sustainability. Hopped on here at GT after graduation. I've been fortunate enough to work on a good variety of projects, from solid waste management plans, feasibility studies, GIS work, mapping and analysis, grant writing, and then of course gotten to do some fun stuff digging through trash on the waste audits. So thanks for having us, and I'll let Karen introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Ben. So I started my career, which was many years ago. My first project was doing a waste audit at a large Ohio landfill. Last night, I just did a report on a waste audit at a business. And waste audits are fundamental for identifying what's in your waste stream, what you can recycle, how you improve your program. So I'm thrilled to be supporting GT with their initiatives in this area.
Perfect. So the agenda for today's PowerPoint will give you a good overview of waste characterization, waste composition and generation studies, and then some of the results from those studies, and then some benefits to waste auditing. So to jump in to waste composition and the generation studies overview, just a little bit about GT Environmental. We're based in Columbus, Ohio. So we've been in business since 1995. And since then, we've conducted a variety of waste audits for a variety of clients, from as specialized as hospitals and universities to larger counties and solid waste districts. So we can really specialize projects to any business, and we have the capability to do those waste audits in-house and deliver those results and data in a really clear way to drive program development. So a little bit about what a waste audit is. So a waste audit is a sophisticated measured dumpster dive. It's basically a formal structured process that identifies the amount of waste produced and the composition of that waste. So why is it important to conduct a waste audit? It's really valuable because they give you a really good insight of what exactly is being disposed of. So knowing what is going in is the first step in keeping it out. So after completing a waste audit, you're able to evaluate the success of your business and their diversion efforts, and then ultimately identify new opportunities for diversion. Another point I want to point out is a waste audit creates a really good baseline measure in which it gives you the ability to set and monitor your goals that you set for your project. And with that, you're able to really track the performance of your organization. So another benefit is it gives you the ability to inform your planning decisions and understand really what your recycling contamination is in your streams and uncovers ways to improve. And then finally, you can estimate the economic value of your waste and also the energy value. So any material in the landfill that has a market value is basically money that you're throwing away. So there's opportunity in that. And then also in the energy value of waste. So for example, you can estimate the energy savings between using virgin plastics versus recycled feedstock. So jumping into the process overview, it's really important in the beginning of planning your waste audit to identify the needs of your business and ultimately plan your goals around those. So when you get into designing your study, you can outline your study based on those project goals, and then you can work on, building a team, developing a timeline, and understanding really how your waste is currently managed. So these are all important in designing the study. And then once you begin conducting your field work, it's really critical to assign roles and just determine your sample size and determine your waste categories. So it's helpful to observe or conduct a pre-audit to really identify common objects and materials in your waste stream, so then you can really tailor your categories. So then when you finish your waste audit sampling and your recording data, you analyze the data. So here at GT, we compile the data into an audit report for all of the waste audits that we conduct. So it's basically a detailed outline of the procedure we followed and the quantitative findings and relevant charts and graphs, and any sampling methods that we use and dates and photos of the materials. So this is just a snapshot of the elements that play a really critical role in executing a very meaningful audit. But with that, I will pass it off to Ben, and he will jump into the results and the benefits of waste auditing.
Thank you. We wanted to present everyone with some results of actual waste studies that we've done here at GT. So to do that, we're going to go through 3 case studies real quick, just that we've done here for various entities in the past. So our first case study, this was for a commercial business. It was actually for a restaurant, and this restaurant wanted to establish a baseline trash and recycling composition. So they did this with a pre-audit and a post-audit. And in the pre-audit, they found that 3% of their waste stream was actual trash, and then an overwhelming majority of 96% was compostable material. The remainder 1% was recyclable material. And in the post-audit, after implementing diversion efforts, which I'll touch on here in a minute, the compostable material decreased by 43%. So all of that material that would have gone to the landfill is now being composted and diverted away from that landfill. So we were really happy to see that 43% decrease. As for the waste diversion efforts, obviously 96% is a very large majority. So most of the diversion efforts were focused on that compostable material. Food donation, any unused food that was able to be donated to local food banks. This commercial business started doing that. And then also composting, any food scraps, any leftovers from customers, I should say. Instead of throwing it in the trash, this business tried their best to create a composting program and divert that away from the trash stream. So that's a majority of where that 43% decrease stemmed from, but they also had other factors that they worked towards, one of them being reusable serviceware. So our second case study here is actually from a university here in Ohio. And this university, similar to the restaurant, wanted to establish a baseline trash and recycling composition. To do this, they audited 14 buildings across their campus, really to get a holistic sample of the university instead of just a subset of a few buildings. So they did gyms, residence halls, dining halls, academic buildings, all sorts of the different buildings on a typical college campus. And what they found after sorting through 10,000 pounds of waste is that in the trash stream, about 30% of it was recyclable. So 30% of that waste that was going to the landfill is actually able to be diverted in some manner. And then in the recycling stream, about 21% was contamination. So stuff that people either thought was recyclable or mistook it for a trash can. 21% was contamination. Those top recycling contaminants was food waste, actual trash, and non-recyclable plastics. And then the top materials for the trash stream were food waste again, fibers, which are any cardboard, any paper, kind of that fibrous material, and then non-recyclable plastics again. So their path forward, they developed a specific education and outreach campaign, really focused on raising awareness for the campus staff, students, anybody really on the campus as to what is recyclable, what is accepted on the campus. And then they paired that with increasing their signage at the actual recycling containers, making them simple, making them easy to understand, to try and divert as much material as possible. And then our last case study here, this is on a little bit larger of a scale. This is for an entire county here in Ohio, and their goal was program improvement. So they actually had a variety of programs already, but what they were interested in is figuring out what materials to target to obtain a higher diversion rate. And so what they found after their waste sort was that most of the trash in their stream could have been recovered and already had available outlets. So over there on the right side of the screen, you can see the breakdown by material. 29% was fibers, like I said, the cardboard, the paper. 17% was the plastics. Both of those have readily available outlets and end markets. Food waste, yard waste, and wood waste is all compostable. It's all divertible away from landfills. And then same with the metals and glass is also recyclable. So at the end of it, it was 20 to 25% was actual trash that could not be diverted. So a large majority could have been recovered. And so their path forward, they decided to take an educational focus on commercial businesses and multifamily housing. Multifamily housing, think like condos or apartment buildings, places that generally have trash service, but rarely have any sort of recycling service. And then, as I mentioned, they had a good amount of programs already. And so using the data that we gave them, they kind of keyed in on food waste being an underserved area. So they developed a food waste task force. And since then, I've actually seen very good increases in the levels of food waste that they divert in the specific county. And then lastly, they had a policy focus on consortium contracting. And this is basically where communities come together instead of being one community, 5, 6, 7, however many it is, will come together and bid for services from haulers. And what this does is it creates an economy of scale. So it's actually cheaper for these communities to be in a consortium to get the same services, if not better services than if they were to kind of bid out by themselves. And so benefits here, we'll start with the research. So the knowledge is power. We like to say you can't manage what you don't measure. So those metrics, the measurables, it could be contamination rate, waste generation, diversion rate. You can even take it a step further if you have population data and you can narrow into a specific community into a per capita basis. And then using those metrics, really informing your decisions going forward, determining the feasibility of adding programs or improving upon existing programs, and really identifying gaps in the current infrastructure. And so lastly here, how to get the most out of your waste study. Lizzie touched on it already, but setting clear goals is really important prior to the actual sort. This will help guide the waste sort of the project and really make it clear and concise and get what you want out of the waste sort. Pre-audit research on common objects in the waste stream. This can be simply observing what people throw away or taking a peek inside a dumpster, but really just getting kind of a general understanding of what is actually going into that waste stream. Can be completely visual, or you could do a pre-audit sort like we saw in one of the case studies. And that way you can have a comparable between the pre-audit and the post-audit and compare and contrast the data there. And kind of building off of that, that pre-audit research allows you to tailor the waste categories to the specific area, the specific project, maybe even the specific building, depending on the project, the waste sort in general. And then leveraging that data. Using that data, like I said, to make informed decisions moving forward. And not only that, but sharing the data, posting it on social media, LinkedIn, or even, the company website and just saying, hey, this is what we did. This is what we found. It's really important to us. And the more that people see that, the more that the beginnings of fostering change and creating that circular economy will continue. And lastly, it's really important to collaborate with the collectors themselves. Oftentimes this can be waste haulers, or depending on the sort, the actual custodial crews, the people who are dealing with the waste on a daily basis and are going to be the most familiar with the waste stream. It's best practice and really just a generally good idea to keep them in the loop, as they might have insight into data discrepancies that you can't really figure out and know a lot of the behind the scenes work. So that is really important as well. And so that is all we have for this short presentation. Thanks for having us and thanks for listening.
All right. Thank you, Ben and Lizzie. I'm sorry I didn't catch the other presenter, but thank you for your information. And to keep us on the time schedule, we are going to go ahead and move right on to our next presenter with Rumpke, Natalie Cook. You should also be able to share your screen and unmute yourself, Natalie.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So I wanted to do just a quick intro on Rumpke. I'm not sure how familiar people are with us. Let me get this out of the way. But Rumpke, we are a total solutions company for both waste and recycling. We're privately held and we have heavily invested in our recycling infrastructure since our inception back in 1932. So right now we service on both the waste and recycling side portions of Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. But I kind of wanted to focus a little bit as we get started just on our presence in Indiana. We do have a Bloomington facility that is about to be up and running here soon that we're very, very excited about. There's a picture of it on the bottom left there. This is going to be a transfer station where we can accept single stream materials, as well as some specialty recyclable materials. It's also going to be so it's mainly going to be a transfer station for single stream. In addition, we've got a station in Medora that is a landfill that captures gas and converts it to energy. This is also something we're really, really proud of, as the energy that comes from our landfill for our gas recovery can power up to over 20,000 homes. And so I say this to say a lot of people know Rumpke is the waste company, but we have heavily invested. If you look at 14 landfills and then 13 recycling facilities. So we've invested just as much, on the recycling infrastructure side as we have the landfill side. And then a lot of our landfills have our gas to energy capture, which we feel is, for materials that can't be diverted through our recycling network, we feel that that's sort of the next best thing from a sustainability standpoint. So delving into waste audits a little bit, we do two different types. Let's go back to page. Okay. So we kind of categorize into two different types of audits. The first, we do a lot of single stream audits at our MRFs and also for cities. So here's some pictures here. I know these pictures aren't super sexy, but this is what it kind of looks like. We've got a lot of recycling plants throughout our footprint, and we can take single stream material into it and exclusively set it up to where just a city single stream comes in for that day, where we go ahead and audit it for a city. And this really helps us with education. And we have a lot of cities and communities that reach out to us for this purpose, because they also find the feedback to be just as invaluable as we do. We do it twofold. Sometimes we'll use our own labor to help to do this. And then sometimes cities will bring their labor in. In addition, sometimes outside of just isolating single stream that's coming from a particular community, we'll also audit just our regular single stream mix for our MRF, which I'll talk a little bit of why that's important for us. But it is very important for us to know the waste composition within our single stream programs for pricing, and then helping us be able to capture more of that waste stream for diversion. And then we also offer commercial services. So we do it twofold. Some is just to look at waste, and then other is to look at recycling programs. So here's an example right here. This first picture you see with one of our team members holding a bunch of cardboard. This was done for a commercial client that had a cardboard compactor, and their loads continually were getting rejected from our recycling facility because of contamination, which I'm sure everyone on this call is aware that contamination is a very big issue within our single stream programs or recycling programs in general. So they wanted to go ahead and do an audit to figure out what the contamination actually was, so that they could use that to provide education to minimize the contamination, so that ultimately this cardboard could make it through our facility. In other cases, as this even more unsexy picture of trash piled up, we just conducted a massive audit of just the waste for a manufacturing client of ours that has some pretty substantial sustainability goals. It ended up being about 1.5 tons of waste that they discard on a daily basis. And in those scenarios, we literally open up those bags and sort through the materials. So Rumpke, as you can see, we offer these audits, in different capacities and to different clients, and we believe that this information is extremely valuable for many reasons. So some of the reasons we grab this from a MRF single stream perspective, it helps us with pricing. Here's an example right here of an audit. I'm going to talk about the specific results of this, because this was a really, really cool study we did. But you can see when we're auditing our single stream, we break it down into major categories so that we can get a percentage of how much we're making on the single stream that we bring in, and it helps us set appropriate prices for our various communities. For those who are not familiar with the pulp and paper, this is kind of our market guide to how much we're making on the back end when we bring materials in per commodity type. So this is something that's really, really important for us to make sure that we're setting up programs that are profitable and we're communicating effectively, to the community about that. So that's really important for us to do. And then the next thing is, because we care about diversion so much and have such an emphasis on this, it's important for us to understand the material mix that comes through our MRFs so that we can make improvements to just the flow and the equipment to make sure that we're capturing as much as possible. So that information is invaluable to us from that standpoint. In addition, residuals. So in our world, residuals are what we're not able, when material comes through our MRFs, the residuals are the back end of what we are not able to sort out. So it's essentially like the trash, right? The waste that we weren't able to divert out and get recycled. And that number is really important for us because we want to minimize that as much as possible. So our goal is anything that comes through our facilities, we want 100% of that to be recyclable material that we capture. Obviously that's not possible, but understanding what even the residual waste is that we haven't been able to capture and what that composition is extremely helpful for us to improve our process so that we can continue to boost our recovery rate for the material that comes in the door. And then obviously, lastly, for outreach and education. So this particular table that you see, this was a really cool initiative that we did with the recycling partnership, where we sampled various cities' materials, and they called it a feet on street program, where we did a before and after. So this was isolating communities, their single stream program, getting an idea of the mix and then the contamination rate. And then there was very targeted education, literally in the residential community, where we were going to residential places and literally providing communication to residents in their bins to try to reduce that contamination rate. And this exercise produced results. So we did before and afters. We had 3 different communities that were involved. We had, just of the 3, we had one that had a 22% contamination rate in their single stream. After our outreach and education, that dropped to 12%. We had another community that had 19% contamination rate. After our outreach and education, it dropped to 11%. And then our third community that participated, we had a 28% contamination rate that dropped to a 19% contamination rate after our outreach and education. So it really shows that effectiveness of being able to reach out to the communities to provide that education, which is something that we are continually doing and continually trying to improve. So to be able to see those before and after results are obviously very powerful. The next one is on the commercial side of things. So I feel like I'm echoing a little bit of the last presenter, but obviously, we believe in the same, that these are valuable for the exact same reasons. Commercial businesses need to understand their loss diversion potential if they're going to make improvements, and help calculate, how they're doing in terms of the behavioral changes. So it provides invaluable baseline data information. It helps them to appropriately set their goals. One of my biggest pet peeves, I just visited a client this morning and they've got a 80% diversion goal through recycling programs. Well, what if we audited and you only had 50% of your waste audit was actually compatible with recycling streams? So how can you goal set if you don't even know what's actually in your waste stream? So that's really an important piece for us in communicating with our clients and prospective clients. And then obviously we're using this data to create strategies that are going to help bolster that recycling rate. I've also seen in my experience that this data is invaluable to create buy-in at a facility level to invest in infrastructure and other educational methods that are really required to get those higher diversion rates. Here's a little breakdown of some materials we just audited. This was actually for a pretty big manufacturing client in Indiana of ours. And we sorted into 17 material types. And we were able to walk through with this client all the different material types and all the various solutions, whether those were very easy solutions or whether those were more cumbersome and going to be a little bit of a harder road to walk. We really want to empower our clients with that kind of data and the solutions that they can actually take to see change. So just an overview of this results, which I was astonished by, but this particular audit, 58% of what they were discarding as waste could be captured through current programs that already existed at the site level. So they didn't even have to implement any new programs. It was just existing programs that were underutilized. So it was a great talking piece for us to start helping them figure out, what barriers do we have to remove so that you can start effectively utilizing these programs that you've already implemented and that are already being paid for at your site. So that was a really powerful story for us. And that is all I have.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. That was a lot of really interesting information, and we appreciate you sharing with us today. Just a quick reminder to everyone to, if you have any questions for the panelists, when we get to that portion, go ahead and start entering them in the chat window. You may need to click in the drop down next to 2 to make sure that it goes to everyone, so that we make sure that I can see that. And then we will go ahead and move on to our next presenter, Aaron Hiley. He is with Intertech. He is kind of going to have an overview from a manufacturing perspective. Aaron, you can, should be able to go ahead and share your screen.
Yep, I'm on it. So I guess I'm kind of coming at it a little bit differently than some of the previous presenters. We really had no idea what was going in the landfill from our facility up until about 16 months ago. And when we really started taking a serious look at not only our environmental impact, but also the potential cost savings associated with that. So I'm just going to do a brief presentation, kind of walking everyone through how we went about tackling our waste stream. So a little bit about us. We are a 160,000 square foot facility located in North Manchester, Indiana. We're about 30 minutes west of Fort Wayne. Have about 100 employees that operate across 3 shifts. Our primary product is extruded coated paperboard and paper. So we take the raw rolls of paper and chipboard, extrude a layer of usually LDPE on it, that our customers will then convert into various other packaging applications or other products such as fiber drums or core tubes. This is about 60% of our sales. And then the other 40% is the dreaded compounded plastic product. So these air caps, we have about 80% of this market is a 3-sided molded foam piece that gets glued on the back of automotive headliners. And these get shipped into pretty much every major OEM. If it's got 3rd row seating, like I said, there's about 80% chance we're on it. We also thermoform other materials such as molded felt, engineered paperboard, and other composites. So the general methodology we used when identifying our waste was taking a step back, kind of from the previous presentations, almost went it backwards, since we had no idea what our actual total landfill input was. That's where we started. We then kind of did some mapping inside our facility to identify how the material flowed, and then got into more of the details of what those materials actually were, and then went about applying our normal problem-solving tools to find solutions. So in terms of the how much, what we found is the easiest way we were able to do this was just pulling invoices from our waste hauler. And, luckily they billed us on each container. So we were able to get that containers, what was going into that container during each pickup, and look at that, how that was trending over time. So at the end of the day, we found we were sending almost 3,000 tons a year to the landfill. And the other kind of surprising part was this was costing us $180,000 to dispose of, which for those of you in manufacturing, it's kind of funny, since the waste material itself is not really tracked in the accounting system in terms of it doesn't have a value anymore. There's really no traceability on it unless you create a system, create that traceability. So in mapping our waste, we were really starting from scratch and assigning a value to what we were throwing away. Then we started looking at process maps. I think there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. My background's in industrial engineering, so I like doing the spaghetti diagram you see on the right there, just basically trying to track from which of the manufacturing processes we're going into which container. Then doing the estimates of the individual components. This was probably the most challenging aspect for us. Once again, since it's kind of written off, there wasn't historically much value in tracking this material. So we had to create a tracking system from scratch. And a lot of that was just doing some very basic estimation, weighing several skids of material, getting an average weight, and then talking with the material handler and figuring out how many times a day she's pulling that out of the cell, and then just using that as a baseline for the material usage. And the other way we did it for some products, if it was a more consistent product, we could estimate the amount of waste we had per part, and it was easy to find out how many parts we were selling, and then were able to use that to determine our estimated waste amount. During this time, we also started taking a closer look at our material compositions and SDS sheets. And once again, from a new organization trying to tackle this, we found just the general recycling codes ended up being a really handy tool to help kind of sort and divide out this material. So after we had our kind of total quantities we were sending to the landfill and some basic estimates of what each one of those discrete materials were, we kind of compared and contrasted those to try to close the gap to kind of see how well we thought we had captured what was going into our compactors and open tops. And so, for example, for the open top, we had 26 tons of these small butt rolls, 17 tons of our polypropylene foam boards, and our monthly average for that container was about 45 tons. So about 96%. So we were pretty confident that we had captured the vast majority of our waste stream, which makes sense. We're not going to capture everything up front. We haven't got to the point yet where we're tackling our shrink wrap and other packaging materials. But we felt we had the vast majority of what we were disposing of. Then we went about finding solutions. We're a lean organization in terms of our operating philosophy. So if any of you are familiar with that concept at all, one of the big tools there is an A3, which is basically a 11 by 17 document that you use to tell the story of your project and get support. So the left side of the document here has all of the information I previously presented. And then on the right-hand side, we started looking at, various sources or various things we could do with this material, different, payments for that, and kind of what the challenges were. This was a really great tool and really started to build a lot of excitement in the facility, both from the management and from the people on the floor, to be able to tell a concise story on what we're doing. And it made it feel the problem very solvable, and got a lot of people exciting. And it also made it a lot easier to secure funding to help put in the infrastructure to recycle this material. So the results, not a pretty story, but a real life one. So we started implementation kind of early 2021, kind of had stuff started to make an improvement. So this graph on the left here is the tons per month we were sending to the landfill, made a slight improvement. We kind of really stabilized or got the whole system figured out of how to get our balers to the recycler. And then we expanded the fiber recycling process. And at our lowest point, we were at 116 tons a month, or a 15% reduction, or a 50% reduction. However, in Q4 of 2022, the fiber market collapsed, and the recyclers and pulpers were no longer willing to deal with the inefficiencies that kind of come with dealing with paper fiber that also has plastic associated with it. So kind of lost a little ground there. However, in terms of going forward, we have identified, purchased some equipment and have a process coming along online here in July that will allow us to recycle 30 to 40 tons a month of that PPF material, which is a composite material. And part of how I got involved in IDEM as a whole was we were able to make that happen as part of IDEM grant, exploring farther avenues for IDEM waste or fiber waste. And we also have a PET that's black and been through multiple manufacturing processes that doesn't have a lot of options that we're looking at. So that's kind of the brief story of our recycling journey. And I would say for me and the leadership team here, one of the coolest things we got out of it was the fact that, like us addressing safety problems, when you're addressing environmental problems, it often creates win-win-win scenarios. So for example, by looking at our waste and making it more manageable or making it recyclable, we're finding we're not only driving down costs, we're usually making it safer to handle and usually having a positive impact on productivity and quality as well. So that's just been a really great benefit to our organization, and we're excited to keep tackling it. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. That was very interesting to kind of see the more in-depth process from a manufacturer viewpoint, and those takeaways that you saw or that you mentioned there at the end. I mean, that's what we're always trying to communicate to our audiences as well. So that's great to hear that and see that process throughout and the benefits. So we will go ahead and move on to our last presenter. This will be a little bit of a different perspective as well. I wanted to, we have a wide audience of recycling roundtable stakeholders. So this, I know universities across Indiana are very active in doing waste streams and have a lot of sustainability goals. And so I reached out to Jessica Davis with Indiana University because I know they do some great efforts towards those sustainability goals and reducing waste. So I asked her to share her perspective as well. Jessica, thanks for joining us, and you are more than welcome to start your presentation.
Awesome, great. Can everyone hear me and see the slides okay?
I can. Yeah.
Awesome, perfect. Well, thanks for having us today. Again, Jessica Davis. I'm the interim university director of sustainability for all IU campuses, but I've spent most of my time at IU actually as director of sustainability for the Indianapolis campus and IUPUI. But today we're going to talk specifically about the Bloomington campus, who has done a pretty in-depth investigation into our sustainable materials management program and waste audits being a large component of that. So back in 2018, 2019, the university contracted with Cascadia. You'll see their logo here at the bottom, Cascadia Consulting, to put together some recommendations for how IU could improve its diversion rate on the Bloomington campus. And as a part of that effort was a pretty large waste audit process. So I'm going to share some of that process with you all today and how we've been able to move forward with it. So first of all, a bit of a study overview. This was the process that we engaged with Cascadia. We're really only going to talk about this sort of holistic assessment of waste materials today. You can see that the extent of the project was pretty lengthy. It included engaging stakeholders, benchmarking performance against our peers in the Big Ten, opportunities to meet future goals, and then an ultimate implementation plan for the Bloomington campus. An overview of the study was that we asked them to look at our different, basically to put together a waste characterization, and there were different material streams, which you can see listed here, that we asked them to take a look at, as well as looking at how we generate waste by different user groups on campus. So a campus the size of IU Bloomington, we're essentially a city, and we have a number of different user groups who use buildings and have different demands for products. And those groups were aggregated by academic groups, administrative units, athletics, dining, operational units, residential units, and then sort of other groups. And as a part of the study, we also had them put together some financial projections as a result of any of the recommendations moving forward. So there was an on-campus assessment done. There were 2 seasons of site visits in November 2018 and March of 2019. So that allowed us to capture a waste profile in both the fall and the spring semesters of IU. Over 70 stakeholders were interviewed. There were 3 waste hauling and processing vendors that were interviewed, and then best practices from 11 of our peer institutions of IU. I'm just going to share some of the campus level findings. So this data is actually from fiscal year 2018. And fiscal year 2018, this is where, if you imagine this pie is the total amount of waste that IU Bloomington produces. This is where it was being sent. So over 50% of it was going to landfill. About 150 tons of compost, almost 1,400 tons of recycling, and then over 2,000 tons of what we'll call additional diversion. And that additional diversion is made up of this pie chart here, which is things that can be recovered for reuse, but may not fit into the normal categories of recycling and composting. They have to be processed a bit differently. So you'll see a lot of our products end up being sold for reuse at auction through the surplus government deal. So this is university property that's reached the end of its useful life for its user on campus. And instead of disposing of that material, it's sold on the gov.deals site. We also have an on-campus surplus warehouse where folks can come in and shop openly for university property that no longer has use. And you can see the makeup of all of this, as well as paper shredding being its own category, lighting, recycling, our nursery, actually our grounds department recovers a lot of organic material. We compost that. We're permitted to compost that landscaping material on site on the Bloomington campus. You can see the makeup in other locations too. So when we look at the Bloomington waste generation overall, the campus had a 39% waste diversion rate. So 39% going not to landfill. Over 9,000 tons of waste were generated, and that equates to about 423 pounds per student. And when we did the waste audit, found that over 85% of our landfill stream could have been recovered. We're also spending about $1 million on labor, hauling, and disposal costs, bringing in about $31,000 in revenue, typically from the sale of some of that other material. And when we did a waste characterization study of just the landfill stream, so just looking at the amount of material that folks were putting into the landfill bin that was going to end up in a landfill dumpster, this was the makeup of that landfill bin. So what people were throwing away, about 45% of it was compostable, 22% of it recyclable, and 18% other recoverable. And you can see how these groups are broken up here by these different material types. When we looked at these different material types in further detail, these were the top 10 most prevalent categories of items that were ending up in the landfill stream that could have gone somewhere else. And this is top 10 by weight. So number 1 and number 2 was food and food soiled paper. Then bathroom paper towels, number 3, other residuals, number 4, a chunk of recyclables there broken up by group. So these top 10 items made up about 97% of the items that could have had some other life besides being sent to a landfill. This is good because it allows us to diagnose, like, where do we need to spend our time? If we have limited time and resources, where do we deploy that time and resources in tackling some of our biggest problem areas? As I mentioned, we also looked at this information by generator area because each of our different units of campus has a different waste profile. So the first one we'll start with here is RPS, which is our residential program and services, essentially on-campus housing. This is the largest waste generator on campus. About 40% of our landfill generation comes from RPS facilities, nearly $360,000 in collection and disposal costs. Found that there were multiple separation schemes and infrastructure didn't really match, but we have some passionate champions inside of RPS. And when we looked at the landfill stream of RPS, this is what we found, that in the trash bin, this is actually the makeup of that trash bin. Our primary recoverable materials were going to be food soil paper, and paper mix. We also found that the recycling contamination was about 16%, and most of that contamination was made up by food soil paper, bathroom paper towels, and other residuals. Also, with each one of these areas, we put together a set of recommendations for how we might fix this particular problem for this area. One consistent theme that was found in the study is that on the Bloomington campus, there were challenges with inconsistent waste bin infrastructure and signage, which if we have time, I'll chat a little bit about. But you can see just a couple of examples here about inconsistency. Like we actually had dual streams, so paper and then cans and bottles, bins in our PS facilities, but that sort of collection mechanism isn't found anywhere else across the campus. And that if we were to engage in these sorts of solutions, we would expect to increase our diversion rate from 39% to 49% if all of these were deployed. In the academic and administrative areas, so these are typically offices and also classrooms. When this is collectively the second largest generator of waste on campus, so over $250,000 in collection and disposal costs. You could see how the landfill stream is made up here as well. Again, one of the biggest amount of materials that's put into the landfill bin is, again, food waste. So our primary recoverable materials were going to be food and food soil paper. We did have really low recycling contamination rates, though, less than 10%, but it was high in our academic areas. So low in admin, high in academics. That seems to chart pretty accurately because in an administrative setting, it's usually somebody at their desk. They own that space. There's some ownership of the space versus our academic spaces are a bit more transient where students come and go as they're going to class. Just a couple of recommendations that came out of this is to start examining composting bathroom paper towels, standardized container setup, and building level reporting in our administrative and academic spaces. Dining was the third group that we looked at. This is our third largest generator of waste on campus, nearly 540 tons of total waste. It also has the highest diversion rate by generator area. So dining's diversion rate is 48% versus a campus-wide diversion rate of 39%. And when you look at the landfill stream of campus dining, you can see it is overwhelmingly made up of food waste, which makes sense in a dining setting. So our primary recoverable materials are going to be food and food soil paper, but recycling contamination in dining was really high, and the contamination rate is largely attributed to food and food soil paper. In our dining areas, we have historically, at least for the past few years, we've been doing composts. Contamination was pretty high with that compost. It was about 16%. It was mixed with paper and other residuals. Unfortunately, both of the compost vendors in the city of Bloomington have since gone out of business. So we are without a compost hauler in the Bloomington area. And we're trying to figure out how we solve this problem of being able to collect compost on campus, at least food compost, because the compost we're already collecting for landscaping purposes, we already can't find enough use of the compost that we're generating. So if we were to send food to that system or attempt to do something with food ourselves, we don't have the capacity to use all of that compost ourselves on campus. Some recommendations that came out of here was some back of house employee training, color coding our bins, and then also front of house education, signage, and moving to a more durable food service situation versus disposable. That does require some pretty large infrastructure investments in dishwashers and sinks in order to be able to move from disposable to reusable. And then the last group that we looked at was athletics. So these are typically our big athletic venues like football and basketball arenas and stadiums. About 400 tons of waste was generated. That's less than 10% of all of IU's generation. They are high profile locations, and it is really, really difficult to control tailgating and people properly disposing of items, which is why you see there at the bottom that our recycling contamination rate was the highest in this area. You can imagine a lot of drunk people getting them to do anything is a challenge. But when we look at the landfill stream, that the amount of waste was highest of compost ending up in our landfill stream that could have been recovered somewhere else. And then some recommendations that fell out of here were to move to a comprehensive zero waste station in our high traffic tailgate areas, engage with student recycling ambassadors, which we have had historically, update our stadium infrastructure as well, so that's consistent, and then also looking at what we're offering in these venues and moving to recyclable and compostable food serviceware rather than just sort of traditional stuff, and using Memorial Stadium, which is a bit further ahead in its zero waste efforts as a model for Assembly Hall. So I'll go ahead and stop here, and if folks have questions kind of about how we've been able to take some of this forward, I'm happy to address that in the breakout.
Right. Thank you, Jessica. That was a really interesting. One thing I just want to note about, I think, universities is that you've got such a gamut of different waste streams that you have to look at the different areas. So it really gives ideas for all sorts of different stakeholders. I was even thinking, and it wasn't mentioned too much, but the residence halls, I mean, they're kind of a mini multifamily units for those that have cities and towns that are looking at multifamily unit recycling, and we know how challenging that is. Not only does, a campus have to look at that perspective, but also the cafeterias and the academic halls. So that was a really interesting overview. I can go ahead then and open up the panel for discussions and questions. So again, you can either raise your hand and we can call on you, and you can unmute yourself if you have a question, or we can start with some of the questions that I've seen come across us in chat. I'll do that as you guys kind of formulate some other additional questions. So we did have one question from Jason Schreiner. He says, what is the largest contaminant in recycled materials? As a residential consumer, I do not feel there is a relationship with my refuse hauler. Are there ideas improving residential user teaching for recycle programs? So my comment just real quick is, of course, like, I think that, and it was mentioned in a couple of these presentations, being able to identify what's in the waste stream and what the contamination is great for education purposes, especially if you do a waste stream of residential recycling for your question. I know that Ben provided an answer in the chat, but maybe Rumpke, if you guys want to go ahead and speak up a little bit more to that concern about contamination and education while looking at waste streams.
Deanna, I can just quickly address the issue of plastic bags and tanglers. Interestingly enough, we've been working this morning on a audit on trash coming out of the Cincinnati MRF, and a lot of low density polyethylene film, those types of things.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Yeah, plastic bags definitely cause issues, and I think that a lot of cities and towns do try to cater education around empty, clean and loose, right? So
I'm gonna jump in as well. Sorry, I was
yeah,
off mute fast enough.
that's okay.
I find the most confusing thing is just plastics in general. So I think everybody wants plastics to be recyclable, but it's not. So I think there's just a lot, I think we just see a lot of wish cycling, on the plastic side of things. And so I think that's a continual piece for us to provide education. And I do think the education piece, is challenging. I feel like we're constantly trying to reach our audience for education, including engaging with our solid waste districts and our cities to provide various education. But to me, there seems like there can be a pretty big gap between our outreach education measures and then the hunger to understand recycling. I don't know that officially answered the question, but I think one of the most effective things for us, honestly, in terms of tackling this is we love hosting tours. So, we are always inviting people to come take a tour. I think our tours are really, really powerful for people to see, how the system works and why certain things are accepted and why certain things aren't, and why, how it really helps people understand how we're focusing our outreach and education measures.
Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, I think as far as education goes, that I think we did have actually a talk about best practices, management practices last fall around education and clear messaging and those things. So I would recommend going back to that recording if you're interested in more about that topic. But I did want to share, Jessica said in the chat that her biggest contaminants they find on their campus are food waste and paper towels. And I did find it very interesting. I don't know if anybody else did about the paper towels and the recommendation to provide a compost collection for those. Jessica, are you familiar? Has any other campuses tried to do that? Is that a successful management activity?
Yeah, there's a number.
Have they-
There's a number of universities that do paper towel compost collection. That being said, you do have to have a local market or somebody who's able to collect that and compost it for you, or you're stuck doing it yourself, right? Which then is another large investment for a university to make. Sometimes, we have a lot of competing priorities, so I don't know how high composting paper towels is on the budget list for that. But yes, there are a number of universities doing it, but typically it's because they have a local hauler or a local composting provider who's actually able to accept that product and find an ultimate end market for it. So yeah, we've piloted it on a handful of our campuses. Actually, we've audited just bathroom waste in and of itself, and not talking about like the containers inside the stalls. That's typically, feminine hygiene products, but just the trash cans like by the sink. 97% of that is paper towels. Of course, you could just ask the question, why just have hand dryers and eliminate the waste stream, right? That tends to be kind of where we're going, but COVID slowed that effort down. Because people were worried about hand dryers potentially blowing the virus around. So we actually kind of went back and installed paper towel dispensers instead. I'm hopeful that pendulum will swing back the other direction.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, that's interesting. I have not been to anywhere that compost paper towels, but I think that's a neat solution. Where, of course, the markets are available, which is another comment I did see in the chat where they said their biggest concern is finding where to take our waste streams. I definitely am hoping that through these recycling roundtable discussions, we will bring all those levels together to provide some of those answers. And it's always just a community, talking to the communities. But Erin, I know that you had some unique waste streams at Intertech that you had to find solutions to take to end market. Would you want to speak just briefly about that?
Yeah, so our most challenging material was that PPF material, which it's a composite. It's got a very thin PET film. It's got polypropylene films, and the foam is cross-linked polypropylene. So just a lot of stuff going on there. The two options we had found for that, one was obviously waste to fuel, but the other one was Brightmart. I don't know, assume there's people are somewhat familiar with them, but basically they have a process where they're able to heat plastic material up in an oxygen starved environment and basically break it down into its base molecules and then recondense it down to various types of fuel and a paraffin wax. So that's actually what our grant was related to, was getting the material packaged in an efficient manner to where we could get it sent to them and they're paying us for it, and it'll actually end up being a net save for us.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, and I just want to mention that it's hard to know what markets are out there, but Indiana is a really strong manufacturing state, and we do have a lot of local markets for materials, as long as they're, the challenge, of course, lies in commodity pricing. I think that was an interesting aspect of Rumpke's presentation. When they do their waste sorts, they also include that market pricing, so you can look at savings on those materials as well as when you're looking at diversion. So yeah, thank you. I see that Rick has his hand up. Rick, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, it's more of a comment. To Erin's point, we had done a lot of work in organizing our waste streams and identifying and then finding a source similar to IU, where she mentioned two of her composters have now gone out of business. There seems to be a lot of work being done on the front end to evaluate what waste is being generated and that type of stuff, but there's still very little resources out there to take the waste. Brightmart is a good example of something new that's come onto the scene, but we find oftentimes it is very hard even if you've got your waste organized, to find somebody to take it if it doesn't meet exactly what, the recyclers that are set up to do it. So I would just throw out, we recycle a lot of fiber. We're sending it to the landfill because it has literally 1 mil of polyethylene on one side of it for the most part. And obviously the paper making mills don't like that because it creates some complications for them. It slows their lines down and clogs their screens. But if there's anybody else who has a use for fiber with a little poly, we sure like to ship it to you.
Thanks, Rick.
You're welcome.
Yeah, there's challenges around recycling all the way around, of course, that we're all trying to find the best solutions for. Design of packaging is part of that process as well, so that we can design those packaging and other materials in a way that they're readily recyclable at the end of life, or not end of life, but for their next life, right? I think we'll have time for one more question because I want to give time for our next portion of breakout sessions and further discussion. So I see a hand raised for Karen Lucan, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. So this is a question. Well, first of all, Ben, hi. Ben and I have known each other for decades through Paul Brush and Hamilton County Recycling. But are you seeing a trend in communities getting away from educating residents on recycling materials by number versus type? For example, instead of saying you can do number 2, that you can do bottles, cans, anything with a lid or a cap, because more and more, we're seeing plastic bags that are number 2, but shouldn't be in the recycling bin. So I'm just wondering your perspective on if this is a trend that is progressing. Thank you.
Karen, it's good to hear your voice. I think that, and Natalie can answer this and address this issue. I think, we're trying to make it simple on messaging, and in the United States, I think, we're trying to develop an infrastructure on how we process materials. And I think we're getting closer to, kind of a national look at, materials that can be recycled. I know that Indiana, has done a wonderful job on messaging. And, but, that's just kind of what we're seeing, maybe more of a visual. And I'm not sure that the numbers maybe were not intended really as a recycling, information as much as maybe the type of polymer.
Yeah, I agree. We have to focus our education on the actual material type. A really good example is, obviously water bottles are PET plastic, but there's also thermoforms that are PET plastic, and we can't take thermoforms. So I feel like there's been a huge shift in education. I don't know at what point in time that happened, but to really just focus on the exact material type, the actual object we're trying to focus on.
Natalie, for not everybody may not know in this participation, the difference between a PET bottle and a thermoform.
Oh, sure. So made of the same material. So if you look at the bottom of both, it's going to say, type 1 PET. A thermoform would be, like you get your strawberries in or your blueberries in, or a clear plastic, like to-go container is considered a thermoform. And how our MRFs are set up right now, as of today, we cannot separate that from PET very well. And our downstream vendors that are buying our PET do not want the thermoforms. We have, with Rumpke's investment in our MRFs, specifically our Columbus MRF is going to come first, and then our Cincinnati MRF is next. We have figured out sort of the challenges in terms of how we can accept that in the future. But right now, how they run, the technology is not there, but we've set up for about 1.5 years to be able to accept the thermoforms. But my point of that is that, you've got the exact same plastic material type, one we can take, one we can't. So that's why we've really tried to get away from, looking at the symbol And that's what I was taught growing up. I mean, elementary school was always look at the symbol, look at the symbol. There was such an emphasis on that. And I think we've really shifted away from that
Well,
for
and
obvious reasons.
to further that, especially for those of us who are solid waste districts on here, I think many of us have in some ways found it easier to be able to communicate why we can't take a clamshell container. You know, we basically say, hey, you know, if it crushes quickly, it's not going to be able to make it through the process, which I know isn't full and complete, but it's the, you know, it's the part that people get, but they get, you know, the water bottle with the cap, or, you know, it's so much easier to explain to people in some ways than just the chasing arrows, because we can actually have a discussion about why it is that certain things can be recycled and not, even if they do have the same number on there.
And so as a follow-up, thank you for all of that. As a follow-up to my question, I mean, do you think we should move beyond the numbers on containers for consumers?
Absolutely, because I don't think it means anything to the consumer, except for the fact that they thought, oh, if there was a triangle, you could recycle it.
Recycle it.
Yeah, we've moved at IU to, instead of saying like plastics 1 through 7, which actually encompasses more plastics than our, because it includes both the rigid and the soft plastics, which haulers don't want the soft plastics, is that we use the word rigid or hard plastics as like a definer of the type of them. And that's been more successful than saying anything related to number. I'll also say that, I mean, I know education folks like to spend a lot of time on that because that's like the fun part. if there's a part of this that's fun, that's probably the funnest part. But education only works within an environment that sets people up to be successful, right? If you don't have the right infrastructure in place, if you don't have the right signage in place, if you don't have the right incentives in place, if you don't make it convenient, then no amount of education is going to combat that. And sometimes I feel like we put the cart before the horse because I see a lot of resources being deployed into education, when the reality is we should be deploying those resources into creating the right incentives so that people feel encouraged. And incentives can be carrot or stick. It can be both, right? To where they know I'm going to be punished if I don't go research what's recyclable, or I'm going to be rewarded by researching what's recyclable. And I have the right infrastructure that allows me to be successful. I just see a lot of emphasis on education, and without the rest of that stuff, it's a waste of time.
That's a really good point, Jessica. I come from an education background. That was my first stuff when recycling, and I do value in education, but you're completely right. When you talk, you know, we talk about behavior change and we think that's part of education, but you're right. It's more than that. When you have behavior change, you have to have the infrastructure and the capabilities there for them to make those behavior changes. So I appreciate that point. Thanks to everyone that sat on this panel discussion, and I hope you will stay on maybe and participate in our breakout sessions that we're going to move into, because we only have a little less than 10 minutes left of our meeting today. So I am going to share my slide and just tell you a little bit about how this breakout session is going to work for the next portion of this discussion. So we are going to be utilizing Google Jamboards. When you guys are assigned into a breakout room, there will be a moderator in each one of your breakout rooms that will share the link to the Jamboard in the chat. You will need to go to the chat and click on that link. It will open up a second window for you in Google or whatever browser you use. And then there will be the question right at the top of your screen. If you're unable to use Jamboard at that time, you can still participate in the question through the moderator and provide your answers to them. But you will see, utilizing this Jamboard, that basically you can add a sticky note by clicking on the fourth icon down on the left-hand side of your screen. And the window will pop up and you can enter your data there, and then it will create a kind of yellow note or sticky note onto the question, and so that we can see those and have a little bit of a discussion around it. In addition, please remember before you go to fill out your evaluation forms as well. We appreciate your feedback. And it's how we will cater our next discussions as well. So I will go ahead and try to stop sharing and put you into your breakout rooms now. And we will have about a minute or so per question. It's going to be a really quick discussion before we come back in. All right.
Hello.
Hey. I can't see on my screen what breakout room. Does it say what number on your screen?
It told me 3, but I just want to let you know I have a meeting at 3:30.
Okay.
So I went ahead and backed out again because I didn't want to be rude. So.
Okay. Oh, shoot. Let me just. I need to move people around. Just a second, our moderators. If you guys want to start, the first question is, what information from today's session did you find useful? I will need to share the link in a second, but I am doing too many things at once, I think. Thought it would let me search names and it's not letting me do that. All right, you guys. Tom, are you in this session now? Oh, Jesse, are you in here now? Oh, best laid plans, you guys. I think it's going to go smoothly. It went smoothly last time we tried to do this. And let me at least share a link. I guess it doesn't really matter which Jamboard we. Jesse, are you in this? Is it just you and I, Jennifer?
I think so.
How does that work? Okay.
I left my session. Since I
Oh,
had
okay.
to check out.
All right.
So.
Okay, I need to go to room 1 now. So.
Bye.
Bye.
Killed the 2 vendors in Bloomington, so.
Boy, that Indianapolis campus is beautiful. You know, the river, you know, kind of going in between. That's just that's really neat.
Yeah, the Indianapolis campus is actually my home campus. That's where I work most days of the week. Of today, I'm at Bloomington. It's really grown up too, like over the years. Like it's, you know, if you would have visited IUPUI 10 years ago versus now, it's a completely different campus.
It's really pretty. You know, whenever I go to Indianapolis, I always like to walk, you know, that campus.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm a little
Yes.
late coming into the conversation. If you want to join the Jamboard that I provided in the links to everyone, I haven't figured out how to share it in this breakout room specifically.
I was going to say that COVID didn't kill the compost, at least not Earth Keepers. It was more of a zoning issue. They were very successful. It's a zoning issue.
Yeah. The other one was, well, COVID and then also a death of one of the owners.
That was a long time ago that they closed down. The death of the owner.
Because we were using it up until 2019.
So we are really tight on time. We have 2 minutes left of our session, unfortunately. So I'm going to just actually ask you to, in your own, I'm actually going to send these links to everyone in the conclusion and the follow-up and wrap-up. And hopefully you guys can fill these out and I can share them and utilize them still. After that, I apologize. We just got really tight on time there on the end. Is there any feedback for me just right now? Future preferences, discussion topics, length, how often you want to have them that you want to share with me in like the last 30 seconds here?
I think it would be interesting to know more about what the man from, I think, Manchester was talking about with how waste has not historically been tracked. And kind of, I'd like to hear more of a history of that, because if it's not been tracked, then it's not valuable, like you said. I thought that was really fascinating. I'd like to hear more about the history of that in general.
And at least for myself, now from Ohio, for total transparency, not from Indiana. But I'm really curious to see how well received this Brightmark facility is. And are they truly this solution to plastics? Like I said,
That
I
is definitely
followed
gonna
them
be
a
a-
lot during the development stage, but I'd love to hear from Indiana on,
I
is
think that will be a
this-
future topic, advanced recycling in general, and we may not, try to finger point at one particular facility. Even though Brightmark is our big one in the state of Indiana. But yeah, thank you. That's a good topic for discussion.
I think the other topic to add on to that, from my standpoint, I'm in a manufacturing facility, is to just make available any technologies, newer technologies out there. Just like Brightmark, right? There's so much advances in the technology and recycling. Having access to those would help facilities like us.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up because we are right at 3:30. Thank you, guys. I'm going to break out and get everybody back into the main meeting room.